The legend of the abandoned coffee shop is one that is well known in the small town of Springwell. It is a story that is passed down from schoolchild to schoolchild as they reach the age to venture off on their own after the school bell rings. And while they tell the tale of an old crooked witch that brewed poison coffee and served it to the townspeople, the real story is much more somber and strange. While many of the dates of the story can be recorded as fact, the actual source of what happened in that small shop is much harder to nail down. This is the account of the legend as best it can be told. Tess Darber grew up in the small town of Springwell. Her father owned the local fix-it shop, and her mother was a homemaker who often volunteered at the local school and church. And while they weren't the wealthiest people in the community, Tess's family was always well regarded and respected. There was never a barbecue they were not invited to, or a wedding shower they did not attend. Although Tess loved her community and her family, she longed for a career in a big city. In August of 1987, Tess enrolled in a well-known New York school to study journalism. Tess loved New York and the fast-paced life she was living, and soon got an entry-level job at a newspaper. She called home as often as she could, but visited very rarely, even missing most Christmases. Her parents told her that they understood, and soon got used to life without their daughter. On the evening of May 28, 1995, Tess received a phone call from her mother, letting her know that her father had passed away. Tess was obviously shocked and very saddened by the news, and made arrangements to fly home within the week. But when she returned home, she got a shock that was even larger than her father's passing. Her mother, now skin and bones thin, met her at the door. Tess barely recognized her. She followed her mother into a house she barely recognized. All the furniture was gone, except for 2 chairs in front of the fireplace and a meager kitchen table in the dining room. The story Tess received from her mother was broken and disjointed. The main theme, however, seemed to be that Mr. Darber's business had been failing. No one in the community came to the fix-it shop anymore. They all went to the next town over to buy new items from the cheap mega store. The Darbers had tried to keep their small business alive, but slowly they had to sell their possessions to keep the shop open and buy food. After the funeral, Tess realized that she could not leave her mother. She sent for her things from New York and quit her job at the paper. She moved in with her mother and started work on renovating the fix-it shop. While she knew she did not have the knowledge to fix things, she had another idea she felt would work. In New York, Tess had become accustomed to the coffee shops. They were cute little businesses that sold coffee and snacks and allowed people a place to sit and talk for a while. The small town of Springwell had nothing like that. While the fix-it shop was not the best place for a coffee shop, Tess made do. The narrow utility sink was way too small for any decent kitchen, so she did most of her cooking at her mother's house. Many of her father's remaining projects had to be tossed out, but a few of the repaired items made good assets for the atmosphere. One of those items that it seemed her father had been able to fix before his passing was a large multi-pot coffee maker. Tess cleaned it up and made her first pot of coffee as she continued to work. On January 7, 1996, Darber's coffee shop opened for business. Much buzz can be created in a small town over small things, so when a completely new type of shop in town opens, everybody knows about it. Tess made record sales on the opening day and was happy to bring home a large basket of groceries and a new pillow to her mother that evening. Though Tess's small savings she had in New York had been helping her mother's situation back home, her mother still didn't seem to be improving. Tess hoped that the creation and success of the new shop would help her mother's healing. The coffee shop business sustained Tess and her mother for about a year. After that year, Tess could tell that her mother needed more help than she could give, and she was forced to put her into a care facility. The townspeople had become accustomed to the coffee shop, and Tess had several regulars that would come almost daily. Many of them she remembered from her childhood, and many of them had been good friends of her parents. They would say things like, "I'm so sorry about your father. He used to fix everything for us, and he was such a sweet man." Or, "How is your mother, dear? I remember she organized the bake sale to get my Susie to go to camp. Susie's married to a doctor now." Daily, Tess would hear stories of how her parents had touched the townspeople's lives. On June 12, 1997, Tess's mother passed away in the Springwell Nursing Center. Tess stood by her side, holding her frail hand. The nurses have reported that over and over again, Mrs. Darber would say, "No one came by. No one came by." Some believe that it is this phrase that started to haunt Tess. From that moment on, every story that a customer would tell her about her sweet parents, Tess would start to hear, "No one came by," and remember that her parents were left by their beloved community to waste away. This was a turning point in Tess's story, and where things get a little bit strange. After her mother's death, customers started reporting that the coffee seemed more bitter than usual. The customers also noticed a change in Tess's mood. One customer reported getting such a severe stomach ache after leaving the coffee shop that he had to be rushed to the hospital. The official medical report was that the man had gas, so no one took much notice. A teenager that worked for Tess on occasion started a rumor that whenever Tess would get mad, the coffee would boil. She said this would happen quite frequently, in fact. Tess would start lecturing her, and she could see the coffee bubbling up behind her, even though the warmer was turned off. As the coffee increased in bitterness, the coffee shop decreased in customers. There were a few, however, who refused to quit their coffee shop habits and were able to stomach the bitter brew. They would no longer converse with Tess, however. She would stand behind the counter, and they would pull out the old battered checkerboard and pretend they weren't being glared at. On August 30th, 1997, a flyer appeared all over town announcing a free muffin with every purchase at the coffee shop. Many people who had stopped visiting the shop saw the flyer as Tess trying to drum up new business, and they figured that even if the coffee was bitter, at least they would get a free muffin. The doors opened on August 31st to a line of townspeople ready for breakfast. The overwhelming smell of coffee and freshly baked goods brought them all inside the store. The 9th or 10th man in line said something like, "Your father would be so proud of you." And this seemed to be Tess's final breaking point. The people in line stated they heard a strange gurgling sound directly after he spoke, like a rolling boil. It was coming from all around the shop. The official Springwell police report marks that day as a mass poisoning, but the eyewitness accounts seem to point to something much more mystical. Those who were there that day say the coffee in the pots behind Tess began to boil. Her eyes were opening and closing as if she was holding back tears and anger. People began backing away from their own coffee cups as it had begun boiling and popping in each individual mug. Those who had already drank the coffee said they felt like the liquid was burning them from the inside. Tess let out one final deafening scream, and the coffee stopped boiling as the glass pots shattered to pieces. The steam that had been created filled the small shop, and people began choking and falling to the ground. The police had to wear face masks and eye protection to enter the premises and pull people to safety. In the chaos somewhere, Tess slipped away from the police. Luckily, no one died that day, but only suffered minor internal burns. The coffee shop was roped off by officials as a crime scene, and no one was allowed to enter it. Even days after the incident, crime scene investigators were only able to enter wearing hazmat protection, and even then only for a few minutes before the smell of bitter coffee made its way into their masks. For years after the investigation was closed, local parents warned their children not to enter or play around the coffee shop. Eyewitnesses report that once the coffee shop had begun to deteriorate due to weather, nothing at all seemed to grow within. No mold, no moss. Even innocent leaves that ventured to flutter in would turn gray within minutes. It was spring of 2006 that a local vandal that had come to paint over the old graffiti saw a sign of life within the coffee shop walls. He ran immediately into town and told everyone what he saw. Because of the vastness of the legend, people turned out in droves to stare at a single piece of grass growing up through the floor. It was a miracle, they all said. It was a sign, some of them said. The next few weeks, the abandoned coffee shop windows were the most visited in town. Everyone wondered at the new life emerging from each corner. Most notably, a large stalk of what looked like it might be a tree was growing through the edge of a chair. Even today, the local townspeople tell the story of Tess and the coffee shop. Some believe that the growth inside the shop means that Tess died and her hold on the place was released. But many more believe that Tess, wherever she is, forgave the townspeople and their neglect of her parents. Perhaps she forgave herself as well, for she too never came by. Whatever the cause, the abandoned coffee shop now comes to life every spring, bringing new hope to the town of Springwell. To them, it will be an ever-decaying monument to forgiveness and second chances. Thank you for watching the abandoned coffee shop story. I truly hope you enjoyed it. And thank you to all my subscribers for your support throughout this project. If you're new to my channel and you're wondering what's going on, I will leave a link in the iCard to the playlist for this miniature diorama, and I will also leave a link in the description. If you enjoyed this video, I do hope that you would subscribe, like, and leave a comment letting me know what you thought about the story. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!